It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Great. Glad to be back in France. I just got back this morning.
You look tanned and relaxed.
Yes, I spent about 10 days in the Turks and Caicos, and it was very relaxing.
A hardship assignment by the sound of it.
Not an assignment, thank God.
Adam Plowright, the France correspondent at the French news agency AFP. How are you, sir?
Very good, Francois. Good to be here.
All right. Welcome back as well. Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for Portuguese news weekly magazine Visão. How are you?
How are you?
All right. And Taha Siddiqui, our Islamabad bureau chief, who's now Paris bureau chief for, how do you say it?
World is One News.
World is One News. And we'll talk about a little bit later on about why you're here in Paris and not in Pakistan's capital. A little bit later on in the show.
Sure.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. Duralex, Sed Lex, say the ancient Romans. The law is harsh, but it's the law. This Friday, rife with tales of former presidents brought to justice. Let's begin in Brazil, where Lula, the charismatic former president who is set to run again next October, is sent directly to jail by the Supreme Court's 6-5 ruling. This while the Workers' Party leader exhausts appeals and speaks to his supporters at the Metal Workers Union where it all began for him.
A thief must go to jail. Few thieves have been arrested in Brazil, and many more need to be arrested.
This decision is ridiculous because it was applied for only one person. As if Lula were the only thief in this country. We know there are many of them in their houses, happy and content.
So there you have it, competing narratives, and Brazil is bitterly divided, Ana Navarro Pedro.
Extremely divided, and we can be upset about what is going to happen if Lula does go to jail, and if he doesn't go, as your correspondent was just informing us before, if he doesn't go willingly. But you know, of course, he's not the only president of a big country or small country being facing justice and having to answer for his deeds. We have Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy in France, who's now in France, facing justice. We have the president of South Korea. We have the president of South Africa as well.
In the same Odebrecht scandal, we have the former president of Peru who's had to resign.
Exactly. But why is it different in Brazil? Is it different in Brazil? No. You said Duralex, Sed Lex, so of course he should pay for his actions, and apparently there are evidence that he did have some benefits, personal benefits from giving away some public deals. But here's the thing in Brazil, that lady said in the report, he's not the only one who is corrupt, but he's mostly the only one who's being pursued in this forceful way. And in Brazil, indeed, he was always associated with two things. One, he did redistribute money, taxpayers' money, in order to create a new middle class. It took millions of people out of poverty, put them into middle class, gave them schooling, and it allowed for the appearance of that new...
But hang on, the same scandal has brought down, brought down people from across the political aisle, like the former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Brazil. The current president is being investigated.
He's being investigated, but he's not being persecuted. There is one thing in Brazil, it's perceived, rightly or wrongly, as a political persecution, and also as in this country of castes, social castes, is also perceived as a revenge against a man who was a worker and a poor man coming from a very modest background and who managed to rise to the top power in the country. And it is indeed an element that's going to weigh on what's going to happen in the next few days in Brazil.
Christopher Dickey, victor's justice, vindictive justice?
Well, I think one of the things that's fascinating about Brazil, in line with what Anna's saying, is that Operation Car Wash, which the correspondent mentioned, has been throwing a lot of soap and water all over the Brazilian political establishment, and lots of people have been implicated and quite a few prosecuted. But there is this sense that in the case of Lula, and also in the case of Dilma Rousseff, who was not even an object of that particular investigation, there's a political vendetta going on. Dilma Rousseff was forced to resign on the basis of alleged crimes that are
she had covered
real technicalities in Brazilian law. And who was forcing her to resign? The people who are also the objects of Operation Car Wash investigations. So there's this kind of self-protective thing that's gone on in Brazilian politics, where the people who are now in power want to focus attention on those who are out of power so that they themselves don't become the victims of these investigations. Is that a fair characterization, Anna?
I think it's very good English.
Taha Siddiqui, but always when we have these cases playing out, and we're seeing it, by the way, in South Korea, those who support the nationalist former president who's been bounced from power, they're saying that the verdict that's sentenced her to 24 years in prison is unfair. Competing narratives play out, and some people say, yes, it's the victory of rule of law, and others say, no, it's a political vendetta.
Well, it depends. I mean, justice has to be carried out, and a due process has to be done in these cases, and that's what's important. I mean, if I look at the example of something from where I come from in Islamabad, and the Pakistani Prime Minister, former Prime Minister now, Nawaz Sharif, he had to go through this whole issue and the Panama,
he's been forced from power over this.
But at that time also, like similarly as has been discussed here, that and in the vox pops that we saw, is he the only corrupt one, and why is he being targeted? Is it vendetta? Is it political victimization? That also plays into all of these kind of cases usually.
Are we in a new era of transparency, or is this all just politicking? Again, people are very suspicious, and we've seen it when we look at some of the reactions we've had from viewers. They're very suspicious about just how hermetically is the barrier between the judiciary and the politicians.
Well, I think there's a tendency to look at all the different cases, as Anna mentioned, of the various leaders around the world and seeing them being prosecuted and thinking that that's the good thing, that this is, as you say, is the wheels of justice turning and people being brought to account for their actions. But it does depend on sort of how the justice system is seen, and whether if people have faith in that system that it does deliver justice, and justice is something which is delivered irrespective of the power and privileges of the people and their political persuasions. And I think there's depending on the country, it varies. I mean, even in we talk about France as a it looks among those countries as a more stable democracy, but we've seen even the process of Nicolas Sarkozy, one of his and many politicians in France that end up with legal problems. Their first defence is always that this is a politically motivated crime.
And we haven't even mentioned the orange-haired elephant in the room here, the President of the United States, who's facing enormous legal problems. So, yes, it's interesting to see what's done, but what's his response to all those legal problems? That it's a political issue, that he's just being attacked for political reasons, that people want to overturn the results of the election, and he couldn't possibly be guilty of any of the things that people think he might be guilty of.
Now, in the case of both Brazil and Peru, some make the argument that the prosecutors have done too good a job, and as a result, you're creating a political vacuum, and who's going to fill that political vacuum? Not politicians that are more accountable, but populists.
We said that about Italy, remember, when there was the Operation Mani Polluti a few years ago.
It's when Berlusconi came to power.
Yes, and of course there is that danger, but I mean, have you seen what's going on in Brazil? Have you seen a session, for instance, a vote at the Brazilian Senate, the Brazil Parliament? When you see that a big chunk of it are elected representatives who are only fighting for the interests of evangelical churches, not really hand clean, really very corrupt people. When you have seen what happens in Brazil, in the upper class, I mean, the corruption is absolutely spreading everywhere in that country. I'm sorry, but it's a country close to my culture. I know how it works. And the thing with the Lula and his party, the Workers' Party, the thing is, there is no doubt about the corruption that is being, pointed to them. The thing is, they thought they could get away with it because they were doing good for the country. They were doing good to people who were pulling them out of poverty and getting them in the middle class, getting education, and that would ultimately benefit the economy of the country, which hasn't done yet.
The oil that greases the wheels.
Yeah, but you cannot do good and be corrupt at the same time. And this is one of the questions, going on with the Lula's trial.
But Anna, there are levels of corruption too, and I have not studied all the details of the Lula case, but he's basically being accused of using an apartment, maybe owning it, maybe not owning it, and
it's not compared with Tamer or others, of course.
No, it's not.
It's not comparable, and that is the reason why there will be upheaval in Brazil for sure.
And on our list, we haven't mentioned Jacob Zuma, who was in the dock this Friday just after being chased from power, and who's facing more charges, including those associated with the Gupta family. Your thoughts on, again, is that a good news story because here's a man being held accountable, who's being held to account, or is it a bad news story because all those years he was able to dodge the charges?
Well, I think it's the South African justice system showing that it is independent and capable of pursuing what was the most powerful man in the country. So I think that should be I think most observers, and I think a majority of South Africans would probably agree that that's a good thing, that that there is that independent judiciary capable of that is not so politically, as we mentioned, this fear of the judiciary coming under political sway, and that in South Africa it does appear to be powerful and independent enough to pursue
which, by the way, is a trend that we're seeing in Europe, that judiciaries are coming under political influence. Particularly Poland is a conspicuous case where that idea of an independent judiciary that's so central to democracy is being compromised in a lot of countries that we thought were pretty solid democracies. So it's pretty scary.
Jacob Zuma, among those making their way this week to Winnie Mandela's home in Soweto to pay respects after the death Monday at 81 of the former wife of anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela. For supporters, she was Mama Winnie, the fiery militant who bravely endured harassment, house arrest, and jailing while the ANC leader was all those years at Robben Island prison. And although their marriage dissolved soon after his liberation, she remained influential until the end. Now, detractors say Winnie Mandela went too far, surrounding herself with vigilantes, endorsing necklacing, the setting alight of traitors with petrol-soaked tires around their necks.
We bring up the white man's children. We could have killed them any day we wanted to. With our necklaces, we shall liberate this country.
So what is the legacy of Winnie Mandela, Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think as your report just suggested, it's very complicated. I think that over the long run, she probably will be remembered as one of the fighters for freedom in South Africa, which was not a pretty fight. We all want to focus on Nelson Mandela and say, look at the resilience and the moderation of this man over the long run. But in fact, the fight for the rights of blacks in South Africa was a long and often a bloody conflict in which both sides did things that had to be addressed eventually by a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That was the only way to deal with it. I think she'll be recognized over the long run as somebody who fought, who was no angel. And I think also it has to be said that people want their heroes to be angels, but they insist that their heroines be angels. I think that women are held to a different standard.
Absolutely.
And I think she was held to a different standard.
Anna Navarro Pedro?
Absolutely, and that is the problem. She was a black woman in an apartheid regime, and she was a fighter, she was resistant. What she did was conspicuous, but of course, but I mean, was she a man? Would the criticism be so harsh? I don't think so. And she does live, in spite of everything, as you said, fighting back was dirty as well on the side of, on her camp, on her side. She went maybe too far, if you want, but she lived her life as she wanted to live it. And then she was a black woman in South Africa, in apartheid, and in a very patriarchal society.
Yeah.
So I think she will live in the long term. She'll live this image of for women, that you can be a resistant, you can live your life as you want, and that you don't need to pay attention to criticism. That's
That's important. Christopher Dickey mentioning that Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996, and there Mandela unapologetic, earning her sharp criticism from the likes of Nobel Peace Laureate Desmond Tutu, and that's something that's come up a lot in conversation this week, Adam Plowright. The fact that she didn't apologize when there was that chance to sort of, for everyone to sort of go to confession with that commission.
Yeah, what's interesting was some of the reactions of the I was reading something about the sort of younger generation of South Africans growing up that are slightly disappointed with, become disillusioned with the ANC and the way that the country has developed, that they sort of see her in some ways as more of a hero, that sort of radical, uncompromising style of hers, that in some way that she's more of a role model than the Tutus and the Nelson Mandelas who were those at the forefront of really the process of healing of the post-apartheid era, where she is very much still that hard line, uncompromising radical that in some ways, if you listen to some of the new generation of ANC activists coming through and the radical student groups, it's much more her that is looked up to, and her approach.
All right, stay with us. There's much more to come. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Adam Plowright, France correspondent for the French news agency AFP. Ana Navarro-Pedro, Paris correspondent for Visao. And Taha Siddiqui, Paris bureau chief for, do you pronounce it?
World is One News, Vion.
Vion. The World is One News network. Taha Siddiqui, our Islamabad correspondent as well. Hopefully, past and future Islamabad correspondent. We're going to talk about Pakistan in a moment, but first, guess who went off script again this week? At a rally in West Virginia, Donald Trump's off-the-cuff remarks, including the line that the Central Americans coming to the U.S. were rapists, that there was massive voter fraud. This, the same week where he's been building a trade wall with China that has spooked markets. He's also caught his own administration off guard with talk of the pullout of the 2,000 U.S. military advisors in northeastern Syria.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation. As far as Syria is concerned, our primary mission in terms of that was getting rid of ISIS. We've almost completed that task, and we'll be making a decision very quickly in coordination with others in the area as to what we'll do. Saudi Arabia is very interested in our decision. And I said, well, you want us to say maybe you're going to have to pay.
Now, that may have had the Pentagon and the State Department scrambling. Not the president of Iran, though. Hassan Rouhani at a summit in Turkey's capital. He doesn't believe what Donald Trump's saying.
Americans say something every day. The current US administration cannot be trusted, neither on its words nor its promises. It means they would remain in Syria and solicit more money from countries that want the United States to stay in Syria.
All right, Taha Siddiqui, let's cut to the chase here. What do Pakistanis make of Donald Trump?
Well, Pakistan has had a very long relationship with the United States, and ever since Trump has come, the relationship has become very shaky. I mean, if you remember, the first tweets that he did starting this year, were about Pakistan, and it was just out of the sudden and out of the blue. and everybody back home was quite surprised and did not know what to make of it.
Do they read him the same way that Hassan Rouhani does? That, well, just, he's saying one thing, but maybe he'll say another. And
definitely, I mean, that's kind of the perception back home in Islamabad also, that he's not to be taken seriously, and he's unpredictable and things will change, and they do every other. I mean, he's the same person who called the Pakistani Prime Minister and made a big statement about it, saying that he had a great chat with him, but then a few months later he was like, we're going to break off this relationship. So he keeps going back and forth. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of perception that we have in Islamabad too.
Now, since he made those remarks that we heard about Syria, Christopher Dickey, your publication's been reporting on how he's been on the telephone with Turkey's president. He's maybe done an about-face.
Well, I mean, not only our publication, but we have done several stories on this. We've done them from on the ground in Turkey and Syria, and we've done them also from Washington. And, look, the people around Trump, forget the rest of the world, his close advisors, are completely confused and very upset by what he's doing. At one level, it's very clear what he's doing. He's playing to his base. He's bolstering the way his base thinks. At another level, it's also clear that Donald Trump doesn't like complicated issues. He likes the idea of you win, you walk away. And that's a very strong American feeling about foreign policy generally. You win, you walk away. So he plays to that. And then we did one very long piece that really looked at the kind of policy that was being presented to him that would keep the United States in Syria, a couple of thousand troops, for an extended period of time and try and build up a sort of de facto entity independent of the Assad regime. If I started to try and explain it to you, it would take me 10 minutes. If Trump had to read it, it would take, well, I don't know how much he can read, but if Trump had to read it, he would throw it across the room. It's clear he doesn't want to understand that policy, doesn't understand it, and therefore thinks, what's the simple answer? Let's just get the hell out. And lots of Americans will agree with him.
Ana Navarro-Pedro?
Well, the problem is, yes, let's get the hell out. Remember, a year ago, all these articles about how isolationist America would become under Trump. But I think the problem is he doesn't want to get involved. That at the same time, he wants payback, and he wants to use military force to get payback. We saw that he said he was going to send the military down to the southern border with Mexico this week. He didn't understand that he couldn't do that. Okay. So he said the National Guard. Even there, he couldn't understand that the National Guard respond to the governors of the states still. But it's not only that. It's the use of force to get payback, and that is very upsetting because it doesn't translate into foreign policy. I remember when we were saying that China accused China of rape and theft on commercial relations, how he accuses different presidents in different countries.
It's a bargaining posture.
Yeah, on top of it, how he lies. We just saw it recently with the Prime Minister of Canada, where he just went bluffing like in poker about the trade deficit, or what he said was a trade deficit. It's very upsetting to have someone that's willing to use military force in a country where military force belongs as well to strong interests, money interests, industrial interests, and not to be able to translate into any kind of shade of foreign policy. So I think he can really start something really bad in this world. Not actually being isolationist, but being someone who can interfere outside and in a devilish and way and very nefarious way.
Yeah, in Syria, I mean, here's the critical problem. In Syria, there are only a couple of thousand American troops. The people who do most of the fighting are a local force that the U.S. has been cultivating for a long time. It creates problems with Turkey because they're allied with rebels in Turkey. But they don't believe now that the U.S. will continue to support them. So what does that mean? They will start cutting deals. They will look to their own interests. They have been the people who've been doing the fighting on the ground against the so-called Islamic State. It is not completely defeated, and it is perfectly capable of exploiting the kinds of divisions that are being created and the lack of morale that's being created by who? by the President of the United States of America, whose forces have depended on these people on the ground. So that is a complicated situation, but that is the situation. And to just say, let's get out, is, as we know from the experience of Iraq in 2011, a disastrous move. When you just get out, the so-called Islamic State just comes in.
Trump's volatility undoubtedly a talking point for this Friday's visit by Pakistan's Prime Minister to Kabul. Shahid Khaqan Abbasi in the Afghan capital to clear the air over accusations that Pakistan's harboring radical militants. And Adam Plowright, you heard there earlier Taha Siddiqui talking about how Pakistanis are wondering what to make of Donald Trump. Of course, when you look at Afghanistan, there's always that three-way equation, isn't there, between Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan?
Yeah, there is, and it's obviously relations between the Afghan and Pakistan government have been extremely strained, and it's a step forward that the Pakistan Prime Minister would go there. It's all the main thing that we're looking at, obviously, is this talk again of peace talks of the Afghan president talking about unconditional peace talks with the Taliban, of trying to bring some semblance of order to the country. Pakistan would be absolutely key to for any sort of.
And that accusation that the Pakistani military is somehow supporting certain militants.
It's a long-standing, it's the same accusation that is made by the Afghan government, the Indian government, and the American government, which the Pakistani government for its side sees simply as being a sort of blame game, that it's always the country that's cited every time something for any sort of terror movement in the region. I think there is plenty of evidence of Pakistani support that the government has admitted in the past to for the Pakistani Taliban. So I don't think that's without doubt.
That brings us to your open letter, Taha, which was sent to the head of Pakistan's army. It's published in The Guardian. You describe as going to see Pakistan's interior minister and quickly during that meeting realizing he's not the guy in charge.
Definitely not. I mean, when you guys were just discussing about the Pakistani Prime Minister going to Kabul, the thing is that when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to defense policy, it's the military that's in charge in Pakistan, and the military has a very different view of how things are to be done in the region, in the sense that, we've seen these kind of gestures from the Pakistani civilian sides where they've gone to Afghanistan, kind of reached out, but then all of that process has been sabotaged. Similarly with India, the Pakistani civilian leadership has reached out, and then that has been sabotaged. And that's because the Pakistan military wants to continue engaging in a conflict, wants to continue its relevance, in the country, wants to maintain that relevance. And because of that, I would expect that, the Pakistani Prime Minister meeting with the Kabul administration will not bring any results. It will go back to the same thing, because the Pakistan army is not really willing to give up its strategic assets in this idea that it has this depth in Afghanistan, or India is an enemy, and all of those things.
So you were nearly kidnapped in Islamabad, and you go to see the interior minister, and he suggests to you, why don't you write a letter of apology to the head of the army, is what he suggests to you at that particular moment. And that's why you took the decision to take your family and come here to Paris, where it's safer.
Well, I at that time he said, I should do this, and this is when I got the idea to write a letter. But I wasn't going to write a private letter, and the letter's content were going to be very different from what he was telling me to sort of, write in the content. And so I've addressed this letter openly and publicly, and I talk about how dissent is being targeted in Pakistan, and particularly this year, run up to the elections, which are in 2 months or so. Pakistani media channels, the mainstream channels, are being shut down.
Yeah, there's GOTV, which has been knocked off air, and nobody seems to be able to own up to it officially, right? There's no official proclamation. It just is off air.
No, the Information Ministry came out and said that we did not order this. The Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority said that we did not order this. But the cable operators are saying that we're getting calls from people who are pretending to be from the authorities, saying that you have to put this channel down. So definitely this is a pre-rigging, a sort of pre-poll rigging that we're seeing happening in Pakistan, because in the coming days, Nawaz Sharif's government, which has had trouble with the military, they do not want that government to come back into power with a similar sort of majority that it enjoyed into the 2013 elections.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think Taha put his finger on the problem, the central problem that everybody has dealing with Pakistan, which is that the military is running the show, especially in all the respects that the United States is concerned about. And it isn't just alleged to be supporting the Taliban. It created the Taliban back in the mid-90s as a tool to actually initially stabilize Afghanistan and then to be an ally against India of Pakistan. What's the big concern of the Pakistani military? It's not just that they want their power. It's that they see the world as a zero-sum game with India. And if India wins anything, Pakistan loses, especially the Pakistani military. And they see Afghanistan as a huge problem there, because they think that if India makes too many inroads in Afghanistan, it creates a strategic difficulty for Pakistan. That's the way they think. I'm not justifying it, but that's the way they think. And thinking that way, they feel they can do anything, shut down the press, persecute reporters.
And Washington's current policy of saying, hey, this has gone too far, we're going to get closer to India now, is that going to work?
Is it going to work in terms of helping stabilize Pakistan? No, it's not going to work at all. I defer to Taha on that.
No, yeah, basically, I mean, because of that, what Pakistan is going is for the other option of sort of like, it has China. And its dependence on China is increasing, and with China's investments in Pakistan and the access that they will have to the southern ports in Pakistan, that's the strategic asset, the access that they have. So all of that is playing up, and then if China comes into the whole the region and the way it comes, then we're going to have further those kind of problems of human rights, of freedom of speech. So Pakistan is perhaps because of the isolation that it's facing from the West or from its older allies, it's further going into these allying with these countries, which are going to be further problematic for a democratic sort of rule in the country.
Does the future of Europe, meanwhile, hang in the balance of what on the face of it looks like just another French rail strike? Emmanuel Macron is up against rail workers who are against a change in the status for the national carrier, the SNCF, which currently carries with it a €14 billion debt burden and has to prepare for an EU-imposed opening to competition. The SNCF also has train drivers who, under current status, can retire with full pension at 52. Now, a slight majority of French citizens, according to surveys, support Macron's reform, but with rolling strikes that could last until June and beyond, how will public opinion move if we have many more scenes like this one from Tuesday at Paris's Gare Saint-Lazare? And if Macron caves in, does he lose his street cred on the European stage, Ana Navarro-Pedro? Because he says he's going to reform Europe, but if he can't reform France first...
Europe is in a worse shape than we might think, actually. It's almost disappearing. In the era of Trump,
how important is this? How important
is
this rail strike, though?
This is the mother of battles here in France right now.
The mother of battles?
Yes, because, let me explain, because Macron went into this battle. First, it was just going to tackle the debt crisis in the company, as you said before. Then he associated it with the very special regime that the workers have in that company. And that is kind of a taboo for the workers there. We can understand it, because if you have something, then we're not going to give it up. But he went in and he let people know that by one of his ministers or some source that has been very well quoted in French media, I want their scalp on my belt. Okay, that is a declaration of war. And they are used to have, huge union battles as well in this company. They also, the unions know if they lose this battle to Macron's reform agenda, they will be gone for a long time from French social scene. So if Macron loses, he cannot reform, he can't do anything else. He really loses it all. If the unions lose, they lose it all. And that's where we are.
It's a death match, Adam Plowright?
Yeah, I think there's and I think that's where potentially we're going into a phase of really a long and quite hard strike, because I think there's a lot at stake on both sides, and the French unions and the CGT leader, who's the Philippe Martinez, who's really leading this. They know that in general, if you look back over the last sort of 20 years, you go back to the real last big strike where the rail unions were instrumental in forcing the government into a U-turn was back in 1995, and we've seen a lot of strikes, we've seen a lot of demonstrations and so forth since then. But in reality, French unions are not the force they once were, and I think they are very eager particularly to prove it at this stage. They've got a president who is pushing back and doing a lot of stuff that they want to resist, and if they don't win this battle, they know that further down the line that they're going to be even more. And
by the way, the privatization of British rail is something that's come up a lot in conversation this week. People saying, hey, this is a public service and a public institution. Why do you want to reform it?
This is the big fear, and this is one of the big arguments put forward by the trade unions to resist what Macron is doing. At no point has the government suggested, and in fact they've vigorously denied at every stage, that there's any plan to privatise the network. I think that's an argument that's put forward that obviously alarms French people and in particular railway workers. But at this stage, I don't see it as a reality.
Of course, they opened up to competition the electricity sector, and well, bills have gone through the roof since.
Sure. Look, privatization, opening up to competition. It's not always going to work the way that free marketeers tell us it's going to work, and sometimes it's going to be a lot worse. But that's not really what the fight is here, as Adam is saying. The fight here is, in fact, about the scalp of Philippe Martinez, and it's about the CGT, the formerly Communist Union, which has always been the spearhead in these strikes. And it is clear to me, has been clear for a long time, I think to most people, that Macron wants to destroy the CGT. That's what he wants, not the unions in plural. He has had a lot of talks with a lot of unions, but the CGT, and the CGT knows it. So this is do or die for them. For Americans who can remember this, it's very much like Reagan and the air traffic controllers strike back in the 80s, where you had a public service that was hugely important and that could shut down the nation. And in the end, Reagan decided to hang tough, and he fired all of them. Man.
The other historical reference point that's been brought up a lot this week is the 1984 battle between Margaret Thatcher in the UK and the National Union of Mine Workers, which was a similar sort of make or break moment for her premiership in a way that this is for Macron.
By the way, the next installment, Sunday, that's the next time that there's going to be a strike for the trains here in France. Adam Plowright, I want to thank you. I want to thank Taha Siddiqui, Christopher Dickey, Anna Navarro-Pedro. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Another gift that keeps on giving for journalists is the Sergei Skripal spy saga.
Yes, and it's taken a particularly surreal turn right now, because rather than focusing on the human victims in this drama...
And by the way, he's out of critical condition.
Exactly. Their conditions are improving. The focus at the moment is the fate of the Skripal's pets. This here is the black Persian known by the name of Nash Van Drake, who apparently was worth £1,500. Wow. It is now known that he is dead, as were 2 guinea pigs who were inside the house. The fate of a second purported cat is as yet unknown. But it is raising all kinds of questions, not least because, of course, Russia want to know why this was kept quiet for so long, because they deem these animals to be crucial pieces of evidence. The Russian embassy tweeting out, were they poisoned? Well, it is a very good question, and a lot of people would like to know that. And they've also been on Facebook too, along with some rather cute photographs of guinea pigs. I don't know if that is the genuine guinea pig in question. And what they say is that this is a matter of Mr. Skripal's property rights. It's also animal welfare and, of course, important for the ongoing investigation. The official story that has been given in the UK is that they were taken away to Porton Down. The guinea pigs had died of dehydration while shut inside the house when the house was locked down after the poisoning came to light. The cat was found to be in a deeply distressed state and malnourished and was then later put to sleep. Where a lot of conjecture is coming in is there are rumours that they were actually taken to Porton Down, which is, of course, the military testing facility that Russia has said maybe that's where the Novichok came from. So it really is muddying an awful lot of waters here and giving the Russians an awful lot of ammunition, really, with which to hit back at the United Kingdom. They say it is difficult to avoid the impression that the animals have been disposed of as an inconvenient piece of evidence, because it is believed their bodies have been incinerated, and we don't know whether they were tested to see whether or not they carried or had any signs of having ingested Novichok or the like. Lots of reactions to this. Well, apparently Russian state TV saying that the cremation of the pets makes it all the more likely that this is all a big cover-up. And it's not just Russia saying it. There are some people in the UK too that noticed the hashtag Skripal hoax. Police search of the Skripal's house was so thorough that in a month they couldn't find his cat and 2 guinea pigs, because that's another grey area. No one's quite sure when these animals were found and when they were removed from the house. This woman is either confused or funny, I'm not sure which. This is like a really weird mini-series, How Did the Pets Touch the Doorknob? Because, of course, the doorknob is where the Novichok was supposed to have been placed. One British entity that is not helping in terms of the conspiracy theories is The Sun. Atrocity killed the cat. It is a great headline, in fairness, but the article certainly not helping spare the blushes of the British government. They claim that Skripal's beloved cat was secretly put down by government scientists and say the bodies were incinerated to prevent contamination. Now, there is an awful lot of scepticism out there about this one. Novichok's supposed to be 100 times deadlier than any known nerve agent, yet the only things that have died are the Skripal's guinea pigs and cat killed by British authorities, they say, because, of course, they were left inside basically to starve to death. Perhaps it was expired. Novichok, inexperienced assassins, lot of legitimate questions, says this Twitter user. And this person saying, worst assassination attempt ever. Thus far, the total confirmed kills in the Sergei Skripal case amounts to 2 guinea pigs and a cat. Yes, indeed. Some people not taking this terribly seriously. R.I.P. to the Salisbury 3, says Cornish Damo. Damn you, Russia. They're still trying to blame Russia for the death of these animals. And this one too. I'm really upset about the cat. I think that's probably one of my favourite gifs. But much as we are all laughing about this, there is a very serious undertone to it all. Sean Walker from The Guardian pointing out that looking from afar, it really seems like the UK is letting Russia set the agenda on this one. And it certainly is giving Russia a lot of leeway to say the UK is not being clear, transparent, honest and open.
All right. Many thanks for that, Emma James. Of course, this comes on the heels of that big press conference we saw by the Russian ambassador on Thursday. Certainly the public relations war, you could argue, it's not always playing out in favour of the UK.
No, definitely not.
All right. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.